Some of you may have heard that the Disney Corporation is responsible for at least one real live ghost town. Disney built the Treasure Island resort in Baker's Bay in the Bahamas. It didn't start as a ghost town. Disney's cruise ships would actually stop at the resort and leave tourists there to relax in luxury. This is a fact and you can look it up. Disney blew $30 million on the place. Yeah, you heard me, $30 million. Then they abandoned it. Disney blamed the shallow waters, too shallow for their ships to safely operate, and there was even blame cast on the workers, saying that since they were from the Bahamas, they were too lazy to work a regular schedule. That's where the factual nature of their story ends. It wasn't because of sand, and it obviously wasn't because foreigners are lazy. Both are convenient excuses. Nah, I sincerely doubt those reasons were legitimate. Why don't I buy the official story? Well, it's because of Mowgli's Palace. Near the beachside city of Emerald Isle in North Carolina, Disney began construction of Mowgli's Palace in the late 1990s. The concept was a jungle-themed resort with a large, you guessed it, palace right in the centre of the whole thing. If you're unfamiliar with the character of Mowgli, then you might better remember the story of the Jungle Book. If you haven't seen it anywhere else, you'd know it as the Disney cartoon from decades ago. In the story, Mowgli is an abandoned child living in the jungle, essentially raised by animals, and simultaneously threatened and pursued by other animals. Now, this idea of Mowgli's Palace was a controversial undertaking from the start. Disney bought up a ton of high-priced land for the project, and there was actually a scandal surrounding some of the purchases. The local government claimed eminent domain on people's homes, then turned around and sold the properties onto Disney. At one point, a home that had just been constructed was immediately condemned with little to no explanation. The land grabbed by the government was supposedly for some fictional highway project, and knowing full well what was really going on, people started calling it Mickey Mouse Highway. Then there was the concept art. Disney actually held a city meeting. They intended to sell everyone on how lucrative this project was going to be, and when they showed the concept art, this gigantic Indian palace surrounded by jungle, staffed with men and women in loincloths and tribal gear, well, suffice to say, everyone flipped their shit. We're talking about a large Indian palace with a jungle and loincloths, not only in the centre of a relatively wealthy area, but also a somewhat xenophobic area of the southern USA. It was a questionable mix at that point in history. One member of the crowd tried to storm the stage, but he was quickly subdued by security after he managed to break one of the presentation bolts over his knee. Disney took that community and essentially broke it over its knee as well. The houses were razed, the land was cleared, and there wasn't a damned thing anyone could do or say about it. Local TV and newspapers were against the resort at the beginning, but some insane connection between Disney and the local venues came into play and their opinions turned on a dime. So anyway, Treasure Island, the Bahamas, Disney sunk those millions in and then split. The same thing happened with Mowgli's Palace. Construction was complete and visitors actually stayed at the resort. The surrounding communities were flooded with traffic and the usual annoyances associated with an influx of lost and irate tourists. Then it all just stopped. Disney shut it down and nobody knew what the hell to think. But they were pretty happy about it. Disney's loss was hilarious and wonderful to a large group of people who didn't want it in the first place. Now for me, I honestly didn't give the place another thought since hearing about that it closed years ago. And then I came across this article from someone who had explored the Treasure Island resort and posted a whole blog about all the crazy shit he found there. Stuff just left behind, things smashed, defaced, probably ruined by angry former employees who had lost their jobs. The locals from all around probably had a hand in wrecking that place. People there just felt angry about Treasure Island as people here did about Mowgli's Palace. Plus there were rumours that Disney had released their aquarium stock into the local waters when they closed, including sharks. Who wouldn't want to take a few swings at some merchandise after all that? Now, what I'm getting at is that this blog about Treasure Island got me thinking. Even though all these years has passed since its closing, I figured out it might be cool to do some urban exploration at Mowgli's Palace, take some photos, write about my experience and probably see if there was anything I could take home as a memento. After I first read that article, it took me about a year to get my shit together. Over the course of that year, I did a lot of research on the Palace Resort, or rather I tried to. No official Disney website or other resources made any mention of the place. It had been scrubbed clean. And what was strange that no one before me had apparently thought to blog about the place or even post a photograph. And none of the local TV or newspaper sites had one word about the place, though that was to be expected since they all had swung Disney's way. And you know what, I found out that corporations can actually ask Google to remove links from search engine results, and basically for no good reason. And looking back, it's probably not that nobody spoke of the resort, but rather their words were made inaccessible. So in the end I could barely find the place. All I had was an old map I'd received in the mail back in the 90s. I didn't really intend to hang on to it, it just got shoved in with my books and comics from my childhood. I only remembered the map months into my research, and even then it took me another few weeks to locate the storage bin my parents had shoved it all into. And with this map I managed to find it. The locals weren't any help. When I did find it, driving there took me through a long corridor of overgrowth. There were tropical plants that had run rampant and overpopulated the area. I was in awe when I reached the front gates of the resort. The wooden gates were tremendous, monolithic, and had been gouged in several places by woodpeckers and eaten away at the base by burrowing insects. Hanging on the gate was a sheet of metal, some random scrap, with hand-painted letters scrawled in black, "Abandoned by Disney." This was clearly the handiwork of some local or an employee who wanted to make some small protest. The gates were open just enough for me to walk through but not to drive, so grabbing my digital camera and the map, whose flip side showed a layout of the resort, I set off on foot. The inner grounds of the place were just as overgrown as the driveway. There were unattended palm trees and banana plants standing in their own stinking bug-riddled refuse. There was this sort of clash between order and chaos, as carefully planted flowers were mixed with obnoxious tall weeds and stinking blackened mushrooms. All the outdoor structures were broken. What was most likely to be an information booth or an outdoor bar was now simply a pile of assorted debris, chopped up by vandals and ravaged by the weather. The most interesting thing on the grounds was a statue of Baloo, the friendly bear from the Jungle Book, which stood in a sort of courtyard in front of the main building. He was frozen, waving towards no one, staring into empty space with a silly, toothy grin as bird shit covered his fur and vines ensnared his platform. I approached the main building, the palace, only to find the outside of the building was covered in graffiti where the original paint hadn't peeled. The front doors weren't just open, They'd been taken off their hinges and were stolen. Above the front doors, someone had once again painted "Abandoned by Disney." I wish I could tell you all about the awesome stuff I saw inside the palace. Forgotten statues, abandoned cash registers, a full-fledged secret society of homeless people, but no. The inside of the building was so stark, so bare. Anything that was too big to steal, counters, desks, giant fake trees, they were all resting amid this empty echo chamber that amplified my every step like a slow rat-a-tat-tat of a machine gun. I checked the floor plan and headed to all the locations that might seem in any way interesting. The kitchen was as you'd imagine, an industrial food prep area with all the appliances and space. Every glass surface was broken, every door knocked off its hinges, every metal surface kicked and dented. The entire place smelled like very old piss. The huge freezer had row upon row of empty shelf space. Hooks hung from the ceiling, probably for hanging cuts of meat. And as I stood inside for a moment, I noticed they were swinging. Each hook swung in a random direction, but their movements were so slow and small that it was almost impossible to see. I figured it had been caused by my footsteps, so I stopped one from swinging by clutching it in my fist, then carefully letting go, but within seconds it started to swing once more. The bathrooms were in much the same state as the rest of the place. Someone had methodically smashed each porcelain commode with coconuts and other implements that could be used as weapons. There was about half an inch of rancid, stinking, stagnant water on the floor, so I couldn't stay there too long. And what's really strange is that the toilets and the sinks leaked and dripped, and it seemed to me that they should have shut the water off long, long ago. There were plenty of rooms in the resort, but obviously I didn't have time to look through them all. The few I did peer into were similarly wrecked, and I didn't expect to find anything in the rooms, but I thought there was actually a TV or radio in one of the rooms, and I really think I heard a quiet conversation coming out, though it was like a whisper. Probably my own breathing echoing in the silence, or just another case of the sound of flowing water playing tricks on my mind. But this is what it sounded like.
I didn't believe it. I didn't know that. I didn't know that. Your father told you.
I couldn't hear the response, but I definitely heard weeping. I know, it sounds ridiculous, but I'm just telling you what I experienced. And the thing is, if people were holding up in this place and they actually saw me, they would have knifed me, defending themselves from me, some stranger snooping about. So I found myself at the front doors of the palace again. I figured that I haven't found anything of use and basically wasted a trip up there. And then, as I looked out of the door, I noticed something interesting in the courtyard that I had apparently missed. Something that would give me at least one thing to show for all my trouble, even if it was just a photograph. There was a lifelike statue of a python, maybe about 80 foot long, coiled up and sunning itself on a pedestal right in the centre of the area. It was almost time for the sun to start setting, so the light fell onto the object in the perfect way for a photograph. I approached the python and snapped a photo, and then I stood on my toes and snapped another. I moved closer again to get the detail of its face. Slowly, casually, the python lifted its head, looked directly into my eyes, turned and slithered off the pedestal, across the grass and into the trees. All 80 foot of it. Its head disappeared for a while into the woods before its tail even left the sunning spot. Disney had released all their exotic animals onto the grounds. Right there on my floor plan map was the reptile house. Oh, I should have known. I should have known they'd done this. I was in shock. My mouth must have been hanging open for the longest time before I came back down to earth and snapped it shut. I blinked a few times and backed away from where the snake had been, back towards the palace. Even though it was totally gone, I still wasn't taking any chances and backed my way into the building. It took a few deep breaths and slaps to my own face to get myself right in the head again after that. I wanted to sit down because my legs were feeling a bit like jelly at this point. Of course I couldn't find anywhere. And then I saw some stairs near the palace's lobby and decided to go and have a seat there until I felt better. The staircase was a bit dusty, and I saw this piece of metal on the wall and I pulled it off and, as expected, it had the words "Abandoned by Disney" painted on it, a motto that I'd become accustomed to. So I placed this wedge on the stairs and sat on it to keep at least somewhat clean. The stairway led downward below ground level. Using my camera flash as a sort of improvised flashlight, I could see that the staircase descended to a metal mesh door with a padlock. A sign on the door, a real one this time, that read "Mascots Only." This perked up my spirits a little bit for two reasons. One, a mascots only area would have definitely had some interesting stuff back in the day. Two, the padlock was still in place. Nobody had gone down there. No vandals, no one homeless, no looters, nobody. This was the one place I could actually explore and perhaps find something interesting to photograph or steal. I'd come to the palace essentially agreeing with myself that it was okay to take anything I wanted because, hey, this place is abandoned. It didn't take much to bust the lock. Well, actually that's wrong. It didn't take much to bust the metal plate on the wall that the padlock was hooked to. Time and decay had done most of the work for me, and I was able to bend the metal plate enough to pull the screws out of the wall, something nobody else had apparently thought of or hadn't been able to do at the time. This mascots only area was a startling and very welcome change from the rest of the building I'd seen. For one, every second or third fluorescent light overhead was illuminated, even though they flickered and faded randomly. Also, nothing had been stolen or broken, even if age and exposure were definitely taking their toll. I noticed tables had notepads and pens. There were clocks, even a punch-in clock on the wall complete with filled-out time cards. Chairs were scattered around, and there was even a small break room with an old TV and rotten food on the counters. It was like one of those post-apocalypse movies where everything is left in the state of evacuation. As I walked the maze-like sub-basement hallways of the mascots-only area, the sights just became more and more interesting, and as I went further, desks and tables were knocked over, papers scattered and almost moulded with the damp floor. Everything was sort of squishy. Anything that was made of wood disintegrated into mush when I applied even the least amount of force. One thing that annoyed me was that the light was becoming more sparse and unreliable as I went further into the dank, suffocating depths of this place. Eventually I reached a black and yellow striped door with the words "Character Prep 1" stencilled on it. The door wouldn't open at first. I figured this was probably where the costumes are kept, and I definitely wanted a photograph of that twisted, stinking mess. Try as I might, whatever angle or trick I tried, the door wouldn't budge. That is until I gave up and started to walk away. That was when there was a slight popping sound and the door creaked slowly open. Inside, the room was completely dark, pitch black. I used the camera flash to look for a light switch on the wall by the door, but there was nothing. As I made my search, I was jarred out of my sense of excitement by a loud electrical buzz, and rows of lights overhead suddenly flashed to life, flickering and fading in and out. It took a second for my eyes to adjust, and it seemed like the light was going to just keep getting brighter until all the bulbs exploded. But just when I thought it was about to reach that critical stage, the lights dimmed a bit and steadied. The room was exactly as I had pictured it. Various Disney costumes hung on the walls, fully put together like strange cartoon cadavers hung from invisible nooses. There was an entire rack of loincloths and native clothes on hangers towards the back. And what I found odd, and what I wanted to photograph right away, was a Mickey Mouse costume at the centre of this room. Unlike the other costumes, it was lying on its back in the centre of the floor like a murder victim. The fur on the costume was rotten, creating bare patches. What really freaked me out was the colouring of the costume. It was like a photo negative of the actual Mickey Mouse. Black where he should be white, and white where he should be black. His normally red overalls were light blue. The sight was off-putting enough that I actually forgot to photograph the thing until last. I took a picture of the costumes hanging on the walls, upward angles, downward angles, side shots to show an entire row of frozen, putrid cartoon faces, some of them with their plastic eyes missing. Then I decided to stage a shot. I just wanted to take a photograph of one of the character heads on the slick, grimy floor, and I saw this Donald Duck costume, and I carefully removed its head so the thing wouldn't fall apart in my hands. And as I looked into the face of this wide-eyed duck head, a loud smashing sound made me jump with fright. I looked down at my feet, and there between my shoes was a human skull. It had fallen out of the duck head and shattered into pieces at my feet. Only the empty face and lower jaw remained, staring up at me. As you'd expect, I dropped the duck head immediately and moved for the door. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back to the skull on the floor. I had to take a picture of it, you know I had to. I needed proof of what happened, especially if Disney was going to somehow make this go away. I had no doubt in my mind right from the start that even if it was just gross negligence, Disney was responsible for this. That's when Mickey Mouse, that photo negative, Mickey Mouse in the middle of the floor, started to get up. First sitting up, then climbing to its feet. The Mickey Mouse costume, or whatever was inside of it, stood there at the centre of the room, its fake face just staring directly at me as I mumbled, "No, no, no, no," over and over and over. With my shaking hands and violently thrashing heart and legs that had once again turned to jelly, I managed to lift the camera and aim it at the opposite creature, now quietly sizing me up. The digital camera's screen displayed a perfect silhouette of the Mickey costume, and as the camera moved in my unsteady hands, the camera died. It went blank and quiet and broke. I raised my eyes once again to the Mickey Mouse costume.
Hey,
it said in a hushed, perfectly executed Mickey Mouse voice.
wanna see my head come off?
It started to pull at its own head, working its clumsy, glove-clad fingers around its neck with clawing, impatient movements similar to a wounded man trying to pull himself free from a predator's jaws. As it worked its digits into its neck, I saw so much blood, so much thick, chunky yellow blood. I turned away as I heard a sickening tearing of cloth and flesh. I only cared about getting away. Above the doorway out of this room, I noticed the final message clawed into the metal with bone or fingernails. Abandoned by God. I never got the pictures out of my camera. I never wrote the blog entry about it. After I ran from that place, fled for my sanity if not my very life, I knew why Disney didn't want anyone to know about that place. They didn't want anyone like me getting in. and they didn't want anything like that getting out.